Hello everyone, I'm going to make this video to talk a bit about my Anki deck settings, some organizations tips about using subdecks versus tags, and also how you can use filtered decks. I got some questions after the last session we did, and so I thought to answer all of them I'll just make a video like this. Bear with me because it might lag a little. My computer's not doing the best right now. So first of all, I just want to say if you go to browse, you'll be able to see like how many total cards you have. So if I'm going to just go to deck, I just want to show this one. You can see that I have quite a lot of cards. So depending on how many cards you have, your Anki might be slow or might not cause any trouble. Um, what I'm going to show today is basically designed to make sure you don't lag as much when you use Anki, and it's you spending most of your time studying in Anki and not just bearing the load of how many things you've got going on, especially if your cards have pictures and diagrams and things like that. So that's the sort of perspective I'm taking. What I'm going to talk about is not necessarily essential. You can do without it, but I think you should definitely consider tweaking it around to make sure it's as efficient as it can be. So first of all, I just want to go over the Anki deck settings. There was some interest about why I have it the way I do, and so I'll go about explaining that. If you go on, click on this and click options, you'll get a different options menu. So if this is what you're used to, that's great. You've probably joined Anki quite recently. I'm used to the old settings, so to get that, you just want to hold shift and then click on options, and then you get a message box like this. Doesn't really matter if you're used to the old one, that's fine. I just don't know how to navigate the new one, so this is the one I'm going to use. So basically, the two main things I want to focus on is the steps I have, which are very different to what you might see the default settings as 1 in 10 minutes. And then I want to focus a bit more on reviews, the maximum interval, and I'll go about explaining why that's set at 10 years. And then we'll look at lapses and how you can overcome some of the shortcomings that this system has. So first of all, the steps basically tell you how many times you'll see this card, and if you get it correctly, when is the next time you're going to see the card before it graduates. And by graduate, we mean it is no longer a quote-unquote learning card. Anki thinks you have learned this card now, and so anytime you get it wrong going forward, you'll be punished and you'll see the card more frequently to compensate for that. So the idea here is if you see it more times before it graduates, you hopefully learn it really, really well. So when it does graduate, your chances of getting wrong afterwards are not as high. And so that's the point of having multiple steps. Not everyone has this. This is just something I really, really like, and it's worked well for me. The other thing I want to show is the maximum interval. Mine's set at 10 years. So I remember in first year, it used to be around 60 days, even 45 days. Then some point during second year, the card load was really high, so it went up as high as 6 months. And I think all throughout third year, I kept it at around 6 months. But the card load is ridiculously high, and I have also found that having a maximum interval that is longer is actually more beneficial for your retention. So I want to show you a little bit. So have a look at this video on YouTube if you have time. I feel like if you're going to use Anki and this is going to be your main source of learning, then you might as well spend the time to learn things about it. And so I think it's worth watching a 30-minute video. You can obviously watch it at 1.5 speed, and it's going to teach you quite a lot of things. This is a very old video, as you can see, but it's really good because it shows you how the settings work. And he also talks about some research, so I'll put that in the description as well. But here's the two papers that he talks about, and the idea is the longer the interval, the more challenging it is for your brain to retrieve the information. And the reason you remember something is not only because the reason you can recall it. Well, let me rephrase that. If you remember it better, that means you have better recalling ability, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to bring information that is stored in your brain out and to be able to use it. So the idea is the harder you make it for yourself without making it too difficult, the better it is. And so there's two research that talks about the idea that about the spacing effect. So if you space your cards out further and further, like mine are going to be eventually with intervals this great, the harder it's going to be, and the more challenge I find in retrieving the information, the better it'll stick with me. That's the idea, at least. I've only used this for maybe 4 months now. I initially did 1 year, and now I've just made it 10 years. So we'll see how it goes, but I really think it's a good idea. And if you ever used a add-on called there's this one, simulate, I think. Yep. So basically you can use this add-on to see what your card load is going to be with like how many new cards you're doing every day and stuff like that. And you can see that like over time your reviews build up and you have more and more reviews. So if you don't want to be spending like 3 or 4 hours every day doing Anki, then you need to be smart about how you organize your settings to make sure that you decrease your card load, and because you don't want to be spending 3 4 hours a day doing Anki. So that's another reason why the max interval is as high as it is. And I would really recommend you go and watch this video to learn a lot more about Anki learning steps, all the settings, because this is where I learned it. So coming back to the cards, going back to lapses now, this is something that you can like. Uh, it feels bad saying this, but I feel like you don't need to punish yourself and make it zero. Yes, you'll remember things a lot better if you start again. So the idea is when you get a card wrong, if this is 0%, that means going forward, you're not going to have the benefit of having known this card at one point, and it's literally going to treat you like this is a new card, and you're going to see it really, really frequently. But let's say this was a card that had an interval of 6 months, and you got it wrong because for whatever reason you couldn't recall it, it wasn't at the top of your mind, or maybe it's not something you completely forgot, but you just needed a bit of a reminder. So then in that case, it doesn't make sense to relearn that whole concept, because if you got it wrong today, you get it right tomorrow. Um, the interval is not going to be 6 months; it'll be 3 months now. So you'll still be reviewing this fact a bit more frequently, but you don't want to be adding this card to the ongoing cards that you are learning for first time, right? So if you make the new interval like 70%, that means that if the first interval was 10 days, this next interval is going to be 7 days. So you're not punishing yourself as much. The lower this number, the more you're punishing yourself and the more cards you're going to have to do. So I would recommend that if you want to see how each setting is going to affect your daily card load, go and use the add-on that lets you simulate these settings and see how each of them compare, right? My leech threshold is set at 8, and that's because there are some cards where I have a multiple list of informations. It's not the best way of using Enki, but sometimes you need to remember things in a sequence, and that's what I've been recently doing. So I don't want to get the card wrong, um, because I expect myself to get it wrong at least a few times before I remember it. This is just how I work, and that's why I have it so high. You can definitely have it a lot lower at like 3 or 4, and the benefit of that is anytime you get a card wrong 3 or 4 times after you've graduated it, meaning after you've learnt the card according to Anki, if you get it wrong 3 or 4 times, it's gonna flag the card as this is a leech card, and that just sort of prompts you with like, right, do I know this information as well as I should? Have I made this Anki card as good as it can be for me to retrieve this information? There's either one of those two problems, right? Either you don't know the concept or you're not testing yourself on it in the right way, and that's why you keep getting it wrong. So because I know that I'm very selective with the cards I unsuspend and I trust the fact that I'm not going to start doing a card if I don't understand it. And I trust the fact that I've learned how to make good cards, that I'm not going to make terrible cards. So I really don't care about this leech functionality, but it's here, and I used it when I was first getting used to Anki, especially during second year, when you do like 100 new cards a day, half of them you don't understand really well, and so it's really good for flagging cards like that. So that's the settings bit. There's another thing you should focus on, which is, I'm just going to hold shift and then click on stats so I get the old menu. So another thing you want to focus on is something called your true retention. So when I said earlier that you don't want to space the cards out too much, because what happens is if you space it out too much and you keep getting it wrong, your true retention falls down below 80%. And so the ideal range you want to be in is at any one point in time, you want to be able to recall 80% of the information that you've learned. If you can recall 95% of it, well, that means that maybe you can afford to push out your cards a little bit further and you can afford to do a few like less reviews. Because if it's really easy for you, then you shouldn't be doing the card, and you shouldn't be wasting your time studying a card that's really easy. But if your true retention is like 70 or 75%, well, then that just means that either you're going to be really discouraged by the amount of cards you're getting wrong each day, but let's say you're not discouraged, you're not making efficient cards, or you're not studying them efficiently to get a decent retention rate. And so based on how this number fluctuates, you should be changing your interval. This is very complicated, and if you want to learn it, again, this video shows you how to do it. I never really mucked around with that. I just picked the 6 month and the 1 year interval and just stuck with it. And anytime this true retention was really low, it just meant that maybe I was doing too many cards that I didn't understood. And if it's like above 90, right now you can see it's quite a lot above 90, and so that means that a lot of the cards I'm doing right now are pretty easy, and that does reflect what my heat map shows, because I'm not doing more than like 100 card in any one day. It's been, yeah, look, around 150, probably. I haven't touched 150, so I'm not doing that many cards right now in fourth year, and that's why my retention is really high. And so it does mean that I could probably do a lot fewer cards even, or maybe not do the cards that I already know. So get this add-on as well. This is called True Retention. It's going to help you understand how you're actually doing. The reason you don't want to use the normal retention that you might find anywhere else is because it accounts for cards that you're still learning. So true retention only looks at cards that you have matured. So these are cards over a 20, like these are cards that have an interval greater than 21 days. So those are the cards that you really should care about. Everything else, all the cards that are a bit newer, you have time to learn them. So it doesn't really matter if you get them wrong. And that's the idea. You get stuff wrong before you can retain it, right? So this is something else you should look out for. So let me just show what that add-on looks like. It's called True Retention by Card Maturity. This is the code you need to chuck in to download that add-on. And if you go to Super Memo, this is basically, it's very old now. It's not really relevant because Anki's algorithm has changed over the years. But this is some really good advice on like optimal intervals and like active learning and things like that. It does reference the research that we looked at and some more stuff as well. So if you're really nerdy and care about this stuff, go check it out. I don't think it's that interesting particularly because the video has a great summary of it, but you know, if you want to go check it out, why not? So that's about the settings. If you want to learn a bit more about it, feel free. I think Reddit's your best friend. Watch YouTube videos, and if you have any questions, let me know. Next thing I'm going to talk about is this organization of the subdecks. So because I have so many cards and so many decks, it's very laggy when I open this, and you'll see that like it takes a long time before it actually opens up. And so that's the idea of putting all the subdecks you ever have under just one deck. And for me, I've called that deck Medicine. I have these little emojis in front of my decks. You can do that. It's just about copy and pasting an emoji in front of the deck name. But you can see that like it's really messy to have tons of decks just on your main screen. I mean, especially second year, you can see that like it gets quite messy with like per week, and then like having all the lectures inside of those weeks and stuff. So that's the idea of putting all of them under one deck. And the reason I don't care too much about where these decks are is because when I try and review the cards, I don't really care too much about where the information comes from. For example, I would be reviewing information that is part of this anatomy deck, which is mainly second year. It could be part of dope or clinical, which is more so third year relevant, at least for me. It could be part of Anking, which could be as early as first year content, all the way to like final year content, or it could be part of Bond MD, which is more so uni specific stuff, right? And the reason I don't care is I like to review my cards randomly. I always get questions like, how do I make it so I only do cards on abdominal pain in the elderly, like your first BBH case? Or how do I review cards just on pharmacology? And I'll show you how you can do that, but personally, I don't think you should do that, because if you make your revision as random as possible, you're actually allowing your brain to like be a bit more used to how exams are written, right? You're not going to have an exam where like first 20 questions is exam soft are like pharmacology, and then the other ones are like your pathology lecture, and then the rest are your BBH, right? It's always random stuff. So if you pay enough attention, or you put enough energy into learning the concept, then it doesn't really matter where the card is. You should be able to get it right. So that's why I put them all under this. I do have it organized, sort of, because sometimes I want to export these decks and send it to other people, and so that's why there is some point to organizing them. But I just keep it under one deck, and I don't really care where that card really is. What I do is I organize my cards based on tags. So you can see on the side that I have tons of tags. I have some fourth year tags. This is the third year deck that I've shared with everyone on ShareHub for all the BBH cases. But you can see that I have cards from last year, so first semester, second, and onwards. And like I've made it so I've tagged it based on the topics we cover. And I think this is really, really important, because if you ever want to go back and be like, right, I remember there was this one card for this one case and I just can't find it, you can obviously search for it, but sometimes it takes really long. So it's best to have all the tags at some point. So if you ever want to go back, if you ever want to give these cards to anyone else, it makes it really easy. For fourth year, I'm currently doing on women's health, and so I'm organizing my cards based on the resources I use. So like if I do an Amboss article, I'll organize it based on Amboss. And so at the end of the rotation, if I need to give these tags to someone else, they can just import my tags, and then all of a sudden they have an easy way of doing these cards. It can also mean that if I ever want to go back and be like, right, I remember there was something about like Mick Roberts maneuver in some procedure, I can't think of it. Well, then I can just come to birth trauma, because I know it's sort of related to that, and then I can go about finding it here, right? So it helps me be a little bit less all over the place, because it's sort of organized. And I think one of the downsides of Enki is that you can't organize it so nicely as notes. And so when you're trying to put everything that is relevant to one topic in one place, um, tags are much better. The other reason is you can see that some of the cards I have in a topic called ectopic pregnancy, for example. Some of them are my own cards, some of them come from the Zenki deck, some of them come from the Cheesy Dorian deck. And so if I were to select all these cards and move it to a new deck that I would name ectopic pregnancy, it might not work nicely, because some of these cards I would want to include it in another topic as well. So I think a good example of that might be something like, if I go to this topic, and let me just find, what about this card, for example. This is a card about a fibroid. I have it under uterine leiomyoma, which is a fibroid, but I also have the same card tagged under menstrual cycle irregularities. So this is a card that's relevant for two topics, and if I were to organize my content based on subdecks, I can't have this card in both of the decks. And there's no point of creating duplicate cards testing the same concept, because you're just increasing your card load. So organizing cards based on tags makes a lot more sense, and that's one of the reasons why I love doing tags over subdecks, because it doesn't really matter where the card is, as long as I've tagged it, um, and I can find it easily and I can review it regularly. That's all that matters to me. What I will show now is how you can use filtered decks to specifically study what you want to study, right? Um, I don't think there's any benefit to that, but let's say there are certain circumstances where, like, just before the exam, you want to review all the cards on a specific BBH case, because maybe it's your weakest, or you went to a revision night and you found that, right, I haven't gotten full time to study this topic. Let me just cram some of these cards in last minute. You can do that, and you can use filtered decks to do that, so you don't have to separate these cards out. So before I show that, I'll just show you what my setup looks like, because if you say, well, my cards can be anywhere, how do I study them regularly, or how do I make sure that like if it's under multiple decks, do I just study from the medicine deck? Well, the answer is no, because I like to use these filtered decks that I've created. And the idea is I've got this add-on called Rebuild and Empty All. So when I click Rebuild All, it takes all the cards that I have from my subdecks that are for due today, and it sort of organizes them in these four decks. So if the card is new, it comes here. If the card is learning, which means I haven't yet graduated the card yet. This is a card that I've recently started, maybe in the last 10 or 15 days, or maybe it's a card that I've recently gotten wrong on review. It will be here. And the review cards are basically cards that are graduated but haven't matured yet. And mature cards are those cards that have an interval of greater than 21 days. So basically, these are cards that I'm doing for the first time. These are cards that I should really know. These are cards that I've studied at one point and I should get them right. And these are mature cards. These are cards that I might get wrong, but I'm going to try my best to make sure at least 8 out of the 10 cards I do, I get correct, right? What's the point of organizing it in this way? It just means that maybe you have like 15 minutes on a break and you want to quickly do the cards. So you're not going to start randomly doing the cards in this deck, because then you might get new cards, you might get review cards, you might get mature cards or whatever. This way, I can choose to just do the new cards if I want. I can choose to just do the review cards, which I know I'll most likely get it right because I've just recently done it. And then because it's separated like this, I know that when I get to the harder cards, I can spend a bit more energy on it, right? I know that when I do my mature cards, I mean, today I only have one, but let's say if I do have a lot more, um, I can actually spend a bit more time on it because these are cards that I haven't seen in a long while, and if I get it correct now, I won't see it for another long while afterwards, right? So I want to make sure that the cards I do, the mature cards I do, I understand entirely, and I'm not just like space barring through them like I would if it's a new or a learning card, for example, right? So that's the benefit of organizing it this way. I'll show you how I go about doing that, but first I want to show how you can use filter decks to study topics specifically. So if you go over to the Anking YouTube channel and find this video of how to use custom filter decks, watch this video entirely and it will show you how you can use any tag that you have created for the topics and just study that tag. For example, let's say you are using my tags for year 3 and you want to study just abdominal pain or you want to study just bowel obstruction, right? You can select this tag and that will include these 3 tags underneath as well. Or you can select just this tag and then the 80 cards that are inside of this tag, you will review only those cards. And you can do it in a way where whatever happens in your review, right? Let's say you get a card wrong or you get a card right. You can choose to make it so, does that have an impact on your card in review? For example, if you get like a bunch of cards wrong, does that mean tomorrow you'll have to do all those cards again? Or do you just want to quickly expose yourself to as many cards as possible? That way, you can cram a little bit more information before the exam, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to now do those cards forever. So filter decks can be like a temporary source of cramming, or it can also be a permanent source of like altering your card settings. And so if all of that sounds really confusing, and I can imagine it being a lot confusing, watch this video and it will explain to you how you can do that. I know a lot of people want to do study cards based on certain topics, and so that will be a really popular option. Now I'm going to show how you can set the system up that I have. Okay, so the idea is you want to be able to easily rebuild and empty these decks. So for that, you need to get this add-on called rebuild all and empty. There is an older version, so make sure you get the 2.1, and this is the code if you want to just chuck it in. So the way you go about making that is you want to create these complex instructions to pick out the cards that apply to each of these settings. So I will put these instructions in the description so you can just copy and paste it, but I'll show you what they look like just for learning purpose, right? So you want to create one filter deck, and the way you go about doing that is you can click browse. I think it's on a card and it says, or maybe it's in the notes. Where's a filter deck? Maybe it's in front of me and I can't see it. Oh, create filter deck. There you go. So you want to create a filter deck, you want to name it whatever, and then get rid of this whole thing because we're going to be putting our own limitations on this. So basically, to create these 4 filter decks, you're going to have to follow this process 4 times. The first time you make a filter deck, we're going to put in the instructions that you want to pick cards from this medicine deck that is a new card. So that is new, okay? And the idea is it's going to pull cards from whatever deck you have told it to pull cards from. So if your deck is not called this emoji capital M medicine, then then this won't work. So what you need to do is you need to put the name of your deck. if your deck is called ALL all, right, just make this to ALL all. Okay, so whatever the name of your deck is that has all your other sub decks inside of it, that's what you need to pick. Okay, so this will work best and it will be the easiest to do if you take all the decks you have and shove it under a new deck and name it whatever you want. So if you want to just name it medicine, and so that makes it so you can easily follow along and just copy paste these instructions, you should do that. So then you want to put this instruction in. So what it's saying is it's going to only pick out new cards from this deck, and we have named this filtered deck 1 new. The idea is if you put the 1 there, then it's going to be all the way up the top. You can't really drag these and move these around, so it kind of just organizes it based on alphabetical order. At least that's how it was when I set it up. It might have changed now. And you want to make the limit 9. You want to make the limit as high as possible because it doesn't matter how many cards you have, you should be doing all of them, right? The random here is because sometimes you start doing cards for, let's say, Pathoma, and you know that the video went in a certain way, and so the cards are also going to be in a certain way. And you don't really want that for yourself because the more used to you get to doing these cards randomly, the better it's going to be for your retention, right? It almost becomes really easy to do the cards in the order because sometimes you can remember the order very well, but you can't really ask yourself to randomly pick out knowledge. So random is better. That's at least my opinion. And you want this box ticked because what we're saying is, let's say if I get a card wrong whilst it's in this filtered deck, when it gets returned to this main deck, I still want Anki to remember that I got that card wrong, so it'll give it to me tomorrow, right? If you're cramming, and you'll see this in the Anking video, that if you're making a filtered deck for the sake of cramming, you're not going to tick this, okay? So that's the reason it's ticked here, and that's because we're just temporarily pulling them out to reorganize the cards, but we want Enki to remember if we got the card right or wrong. Okay, so that's the first one, and then the second deck you want to build is for learning, and you'll see that this is a little bit more complicated, but it's the same thing. So we want to pull cards out of the medicine deck that is due today, and that is learn. So it's in the learning category of cards, right? Same thing, we name it learning, and we want to reschedule the cards. And this is also random. The third deck you want to build is a review deck. And so that is getting a little bit more complex now, but I'll explain it. So first of all, the name, you want to make a review. You also want to reschedule these cards. And this time we're pulling out cards from the medicine deck that is due today, that has an interval of less than 21 days, and that is not a learning card. So this negative means not a learning card. So you've made sure to tell them that, to tell Anki that don't give me these cards, don't give me the learning cards, give me the cards that are remaining otherwise. Okay, so it's a very strange way that you have to go about getting these review cards, but this is that. And then lastly, for mature, this is a bit more simple because this time you're saying, give me cards from this deck that are due today that have an interval of greater than 21 days. So these are mature cards essentially. Okay, and same thing, you want to reschedule these cards, you want to name it mature, and you want them to be random. So once you've made this, you'll have these 4 decks, and once you download this rebuild and empty all add-on, restart your Anki, you'll see these buttons at the bottom, and so you can empty all your decks when you want, and you can rebuild them very easily. And it saves you a lot of time if you have this add-on, as opposed to going here, let's say if it's empty, as opposed to going in this deck, clicking options, and then clicking rebuild each time to like pull out the cards. That takes a lot of time, right? So it's better to just have this add-on, and that makes your life a lot easier. Okay, so that's where I'll leave this. I think this video has been already too long. If you have any questions, if you think I rushed over explaining something really specific, feel free to message me on Messenger. But for those that were wondering why I had the settings that I had, what's the way that you should organize your decks, and how did I create these filtered decks, or how can you create specific filtered decks to do specific topics based on the tags you already have. Hopefully I've answered your question. Let me just make sure there was nothing else here that I wanted to show. So rebuild, we've talked about that. We've talked about true retention. I've told you to watch this video, and yep, this video for learning a bit more about Anki. So I'll leave it at that for now. Hopefully you learned something new. If you have any questions, let me know. Bye bye.